All right, good afternoon, everyone. The microphone actually turned on for me that time. And now that we've taken care of the most important thing that you ever do before a meeting, which is make sure you have everyone's Twitter handles, I think we're ready to go. Thanks for joining us. And was announced previously, just making sure everyone is in the session they thought they were going to be in. This is the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, Participation, Governance, and Accountability. Hopefully that's what everyone is here for, and if that's the case, we thank all of you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you, and I want to thank DPI, Civicus, and everyone that's helped organize this event. I trust it was a good morning this morning. There was certainly a list of excellent speakers that participated this morning to welcome everyone and get the conference kicked off, and I think the organizers have done a great job in making sure that there's very high-level participation from all sectors here, while the focus is certainly civil society and the NGO community, hearing from governments, hearing from other stakeholders in the post-2015 process, I think is important as we all try and work together to get an ambitious agenda and an achievable agenda that's very meaningful as we go forward beyond 2015. My name is Robert Skinner. I'm with the United Nations Foundation here in New York. And it's a pleasure for me to be here to moderate this session. We have a really interesting group of panelists from government and civil society that have been super engaged, very engaged in this process, very knowledgeable, and have really great perspectives on partnering and working together within sectors, but also partnering and working across sectors to achieve results, which I think that's what this process needs to be all about. I think as we look at where we're going with the final several months, 11 months or so, or I'm sorry, 13 months or so of negotiation as we get to September 2015. We all should be focused on what happens on January 1st, 2016, because that's what really matters is achieving results once we get into that next agenda, I think. And that's what we really want to get into today is how can partnership make that happen, once we have the agenda to work with from January 1st, 2016 and beyond. So first I'd like to introduce the panelists. To my right is Ambassador Zsolt Hetzi from the Hungarian mission, obviously a very important mission, a co-chair of the Open Working Group, which completed its work in July, to offer perspective. To my left is Vera Macejao Ribeiro, the Executive Director of the Brazilian Association of NGOs, or EBANG, and also the Beyond 2015 National Lead for Brazil. To Zsolt's right is Artemisa Montes from the Mexican Observatory on Crisis. And finally, last but not least, Guru Samudera, who is a first secretary from the permanent mission of Indonesia to the United Nations. So what I'd like to do as we work through our conversation here is just ask a general first question to the panelists, see where we are after we do that first round in terms of time. We have roughly an hour from right now, and I know that a lot of you would like to participate. And depending on timing, I may do a follow-up question to all the panelists, or I may just throw open the floor depending on how we're going. So again, thank you all for being here, and I'll throw the first question to Ambassador Hetzi. As co-chair, Hungary was obviously very involved with the Open Working Group process. Certainly a lot of issues to work through during that process, and I'd just like your perspective on the role that you see partnership playing, how the conversations around partnership played out in the Open Working Group, and how you envision partnership working as we finalize the agenda and then, as I indicated, look to moving forward to achieve results.
Robert, thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be here and kick off this roundtable discussion. Indeed, I would like to talk about this issue, the question that you have thrown at me, through the lens of the Open Working Group and how we saw the dynamics unfolding. Indeed, I will not be able to give you a complete answer. And that is not the fault of the Open Working Group. It's a consequence of our mandate. Because if you take a look at the Rio +20 outcome document, the future we want, it tells the Open Working Group to deal with the what questions. Meaning that we had to find the answers to what the international community would like to achieve in the field of sustainable development after 2015. And the how questions, how the international community would like to achieve that, partially come during the next year, during the next phase of our negotiations, during the intergovernmental negotiations. And also the question that you have thrown at me will be the question of implementation mainly. But let me start with a dichotomy that we have realized during the open working group. It is very clear that the final decisions on sustainable development will be taken by member states, governments. There will be an intergovernmental negotiations and there will be a summit. And there, as you know, member states, governments have the right to vote. Hopefully they don't have to vote, they will achieve it by consensus. But then comes the implementation part, where it is very clear for us that giving the task to governments only will not be enough. It just will not be enough. We will need a joint effort, and this is the message that I would like to give to you. There is an understanding in the open working group, and there was an understanding in the open working group that we will need a joint effort from all stakeholders, whether it would be private companies, financing institutions, NGOs, political pressure groups, philanthropy, charitable organizations, volunteers, and everybody. And also we need these resources to be pooled together. So how to take care of that dichotomy? We have always advocated to instill a sense of ownership, meaning that we would like to bring stakeholders as close to the decision-making process as possible. And I think this is the only way how we can create this sense of ownership for the stakeholders. If you feel that you are left out of the decision-making, you will not feel that it is your project, you will not feel that it is your agenda, and definitely there could be some problems with enthusiasm and commitment. How to make sure that there is involvement in the decision-making mechanism? Partially I have good news, especially if I compare the situation to the MDGs. We have already started well before 2012, during the process leading up to the Rio +20 conference. There you have already seen stakeholder participation. And at least during the open working group, we were committed to make sure that stakeholders can bring in ideas, and those ideas are taken up and utilized. If you take a look at our homepage, I think this is one of the most open homepages that you can find. And actually, we are getting messages, very important statements from stakeholders nowadays, even after the open working group has finished its job. These groups are gearing up for the next phase, which is extremely good. Now, our task is to make sure that the next phase will be as open as possible, and hopefully as open as the open working group during the intergovernmental negotiation, and that is true for the summit. Now, then comes involvement in implementation. And I think this is the important element. I have talked about it. There are some signs of hope, meaning that there are some initiatives that we are already seeing on the part of the government. There is the so-called Open Government Initiative. Mexico and some other countries will organize a meeting in September, making sure that indeed countries already understand that in the implementation phase, as you have said, in 2016 January, stakeholders are part and parcel of the process. Then possibly later on we will be able to talk about the importance of the national implementation plan. I just want to throw it out on the table. I do believe that for you to be involved, the most important thing is that you have a clear-cut, very precise national implementation plan, hopefully in an optimal case, already devised with your participation. And then you have a better possibility to take piece of the action. And then lastly, on the substance, and this is again a very important message that I would like to give, and this is my final message basically. there was a certain amount of fear in the group of stakeholders with regard to the faith of the unfinished business of the MDGs. Okay? Many of you are representing groups, stakeholders, organizations that are very active in facilitating the achievement of the MDG goals. And indeed, there was a certain amount of fear which emanated from the fact that some felt that that unfinished business might not be finished and might be forgotten. Now, the good news is that the first political agreement within the open working group was that the unfinished business of the MDGs will have to be carried into the post-2015 agenda. And if you take a look at our report that we have adopted on 19th of July, it is indeed the case. You will find the MDG, the unfinished elements of MDG in that document already. However, I think that the future will require a lot of restructuring from you. Basically because of two reasons. One is that we have moved way beyond the original MDG agenda. It is a much more complex agenda. There is much more room to work. There is much more maneuvering room. There is much more possibility for activities. As you know, I mean, the MDG was education heavy, health, and so on and so on. Now you have all of the three pillars, meaning economic, social, and environmental pillars. So there is a lot of activities to be involved, and I think it is generally a good news for the stakeholder community. And secondly, the reason for that change or that requirement to change is that this agenda is universal. This agenda is for 193 countries. While the MDG agenda was more focused on the developing countries. I do believe that if you take a look at the agenda, you will see that indeed there is work cut out for each of us, I mean countries, so there is a lot more possibility for being active. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zsolt. I think that you've laid out what is the challenge of the broadened agenda that will be part of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also what is truly an opportunity, a lot more opportunity to work together and on the multitude of issues that are out there. So I think that that's the way we all should be looking at it, as opportunity, a challenge but an opportunity. So with that, I'd like to shift to Vera a little bit from Brazil. And talk a little bit about how you see the development of partnership, how you've seen it evolve, from the beginning of the MDGs with MDG 8, talking about partnership, over the 15 years or not quite 15 years of the MDGs yet, and how you vision that transitioning to, a multi-stakeholder effort in the post-2015 agenda.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I would say that focusing on the CSO perspectives, we have more expectations in the post-2015 agenda, because in the Millennium Goals, we feel civil society was, especially in Latin America, a little bit a part of the process. We engaged, but not with the power and the energy we should do and we expect to do now. And hearing Mr. Zsolt Hertzing talking about the open working group working on the what, and now we have to, in the next steps, deal with the how, I would say that empowering civil society participation is the how, but it is also somehow the what. It's a goal itself. And I would say that, for example, terrible and big meteorite reach our Earth and destroy everything, all the cities and our plantations and all. People who can organize themselves and have their capacity to rebuild, organizing themselves autonomously, would be less poor than every others. So I think that we have to consider this empowerment of people and the recognition of the importance of their participation as autonomous collectives, very, very important, and a target to be achieved. And I think that civil society participation is sort of part of this sustainable development agenda from the very beginning. I think that the conference on sustainable development that took place in Rio de Janeiro on the 92 was a milestone regarding the emergence of NGOs as actors, political actors, on the debate on all the disputes regarding development. And I think it's important because these kind of organizations that usually was accepted as providers of palliative service for poor people now are raising their voices and trying to influence in public policies. They are changing their places. And I think it's really good because now they can participate in elaboration, implementation, and evaluation of all that goals we want to set to our framework to the post-2015. And I think we need clear plans. That's really important. We have to monitor these plans, but if we don't have empowered civil society organizations, we will not have the subjects that can use that information, that targets to monitor and to make all this come true. That's why I think it's so important to consider this. I think since the 90s, the civil society has expanded its presence in all these arenas of debate internationally, nationally, and locally. But in the stand that increased the power of CSOs and its influence, increase also the attacks on those organizations, their criminalization, and the attempts to shrink their space. And I think that's something that we have to be concerned of. Especially in the South countries, we have this lack of legal frameworks that turns to favor corruption and hinder the CSO's legit access to public and private funds. And fortunately, the civil society begins to react to this. So besides their thematic issues like human rights or gender, they are struggling also, and they are beginning to organize themselves to assert their right to exist, you know, and assert their role as promoting environmental justice and consolidating democracy. In Brazil, that happened. We have these contradictory movements, civil society participating more and more, but also suffering from these attacks from different. So I think we are creating this contradictory process. I think we are managing to broaden our influence, and I think we need to continue in this way. And I think that we have to together to consider some common flags that we need to claim together, all CSOs around the world. First of all, the right of association and expression, the right to access public and private resources in a secure legal framework, social participation as a principle in the elaboration, implementation, and evaluation of public policies, including the economic and foreign policies of our countries. Because in Brazil, for example, we have a very interesting system of social participation, but consider the social policies, the social public policies, education, health, but when we are considering economic policy or foreign policies, we have more exclusive spaces that with people taking decisions. Now we have to open this kind of exclusiveness of economic policies and foreign policies. And finally, I think it's really important that we increase the sources of funding for democracy, sustainable development, and international cooperation. And this should include innovative mechanisms such as financial transaction taxes and things like that. I think it's always on the how, the how question is also who will pay the bill. I think that's really important question, and we know that democracy has its costs also, and we have to consider that participation have to be sustained also. And I think that innovative mechanisms to finance democracy and sustainable development should consider also supporting civil society organizations. Finally, I will speak about two misconceptions we have to overcome to have really effective participation of civil society organizations in this multiple stakeholders process. First misconception, that enlarged space of civil society means reduce the responsibility of states. This is a misconception, especially in our countries, that in emerging countries, that think that the use of the NGOs are important where the state cannot do the job, so we put the NGOs to do the job. This is a completely wrong idea. No? In our human rights perspective, we need strong states that are able to implement public policies that guarantee human rights. But those states should be democratic and should consider civil society participation. And the second misconception I think we should overcome is that people don't need organizations to exercise democracy. In our country, last year, we had all those movements at street, like in other countries, that make lots of people believe that people in very spontaneous and horizontal relations can face establishment. And they really did, not only in Brazil, but in different parts of the world. Those movements in streets and in the social media managed to confront establishment. But in different places, we had, after the movements, these street movements, we had setbacks. No? And it's because where the society is not organized, where you don't have organizations that are able to build new social pacts, you cannot really make social changes, the social changes these people in the streets are doing. So I think that I'm strongly confident that civil society organizations, NGOs, trade unions, parties are very important parts of our democracy and the strategy of changing the world and achieving sustainable development. But we, as civil society organizations, have a challenge, that is hear the claims of these people in the streets, that they are saying they want more horizontal space, more participation. And so we have to face this challenge, that broaden our social basis and invest in citizen education and encourage the engagement of new activists, making the arenas of political practice more welcome so more people can get on board. So that's the message I would like to leave you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vera. I think that lots of important points around organizing, getting the citizen energy, taking the citizen energy and organizing it and channeling it in positive directions, but also making sure we're organized together, that civil society organizations are reaching across their issue areas, to form a stronger, bolder movement together and not being so connected to the issues, identifying the big issues we can work on together and working on them in a positive way. So thank you for that message. Very good. Now I'd like to turn back to a government representative, Guru, from Indonesia. Indonesia certainly played an important role in the negotiations with the Open Working Group, and I think is certainly people are looking to Indonesia to play an important role going forward as the general membership of the United Nations takes over and moves into negotiating the final outcome documents. And what do you see partnerships role playing and the multi-stakeholder transformational partnerships that are discussed around the UN, being in that agenda? What do you see happening there?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Robert, for posing the questions, and also thank you for the invitation for being here. It's very pleasant to join this conference. Before I answer that question, probably give an exposition on that, I just would like to say that what Mrs. Vera has said is very true with regard to what is actually the role of civil society and how is the position within the country, which is civil society is actually one of the fundament for democracy. Because I'm coming from the country that have democratic rebirth in 1998, coming from countries that previously being under authoritarian regime into democratic regimes, which is civil society have a very eminent role within the growing of democracy within the country. So that if you see how is the country grow now, how is also development grow, the development there also civil society also taking part on that, and the fundamental of to have the civil society also taking part within the development process from, let's say, from planning into execution or implementation until monitoring is guaranteed by the law itself, because government, as you have said, as also Mr. Zolt have said, government cannot do all by themselves. But I saw also, let's say, what's going on within the UN when we have the discussion on Rio +20 back 2012, 2011 also, and also we have the process in the OWG SDGs. This is also very positive. In our view, this is a very positive development, which is civil society can give the voice, can express the voice, people voice, as the to also contribute to the process, because the political reality within the UN, when we discuss or negotiate the development agenda, is negotiation between countries to countries. So that, but countries again cannot do it alone. Some issues that probably is not being covered by governments and being seen by the civil societies, it can be brought and given attention by the governments that also taking part within the negotiation. So that this is actually very important to have the role of civil society. And of course, if this is recognized by the proposal of the OWSDG himself, that the global partnership should include the multi-stakeholders, which is also civil society. You can also mention many like private sectors, philanthropists, parliamentarian youth, indigenous people, and so on. So I do, but the thing that I would like to share with you, my note on this is, especially with regard to global partnership, I think there are two main elements that we have to recognize. First is the substance itself, and how is the involvement of the stakeholders, and the second about the scope and modalities of the participation by the multi-stakeholders. If you see in the goals, let's say goal 17 of the SDGs, the global partnership contains the elements on what we need to do to implement the development agenda. We know that everything. But as a reflection of that goal, global partnership will require role and participation of each stakeholder to promote and strengthen means of implementation. Because this global partnership, if you see in the title of the global goal 17, it's being merged with the issue of means of implementation. So that at the end, what is being asked by the agenda is, what is the role by that the multi-stakeholders, including government, civil society, can do to strengthen the means of implementation, so that it's also can direct it into what we can do, if we can say that, what we can do to not just to deliver, but to promote the transfer of technology, financing for development, capacity building, and so on, that has been stated within the agenda of Sustainable Development Goals. And in regard to the issues of the stakeholders, I mean the scope or modalities, we have to divide that into level. I mean, probably national and global context. In national context, of course, as I have mentioned before, that in fact the government remains have primary responsibility to implement national development, since they hold the mandate to govern from its people, as well as the reflection of state sovereign rights. And each government can form a joint partnership or invite a participation of other stakeholders, for example, within the countries, and to be involved in the implementation in national development agenda, so that it could be reciprocal. I mean, government initiates something, the civil society or other stakeholders propose something, but they have to have a kind of something, a silver lining. For example, if, let's say, that country have the priority, what those multi-stakeholders could do to come into or to achieve that priority. That's it. And for that purpose, domestically, I think this is also the political reality in countries, and even Indonesia, it should be domestically agreed mechanism or agreed ethic or norm is needed to guarantee the participation of the stakeholders. That's probably there should be a law or regulation that could connect between one and another, so that will be guarantee the participation between one and another. And in the global context, I said previously about the national context, but the other one is about the global context. The role of multi-stakeholder to implement the development agenda will be cross-boundary, because this is global. This is happened because of the realities of the world that is, of course, interdependence. National development in one country may be influenced by condition or other development policy or another country. This gives a sign that no country can truly stand alone, although they have their own responsibility to national development. For that reason, global effort that can govern or manage the impact of global situation or development challenge also needed. So consequently, international cooperation like collaboration and partnership is needed to respond to the current challenges. In this context, that should include the role of advanced countries to help less advanced, for example, because we're talking about the global partnership. First, what we have to do is how is the engagement between countries, so that the interpretation, our interpretation on the global partnership first is how is the role of advanced countries to help less advanced countries, for example. That's one. The other one that should include the role of international organization, in particular the United Nations, and of course in its body, in supporting its members to achieve development objectives. That should also include the role of other stakeholders, including civil societies and others, to contribute, participate, and act in concert to address current global development challenges through existing fora. So that the UN already give the certain forum, for example, this NGO conference, and also civil society sometimes can also engage with the process. For example, in the OWG SDGs, every morning at 9 o'clock there always be engagement between the co-chairs and also the member states with the civil societies, and also myself, for example, a colleague in the in the Indonesian mission, and probably also many colleagues from other countries also have met with colleagues from civil societies and discuss about what is actually need to be presented or need to be taken into account in the negotiation. And some suggestion was very useful to give that, to be taken into account on that. Probably I think that's my note on that. I don't know, probably it's answering the question, but at least that is what I would like to share with you. Thank you.
I think it answered the question very well, talking about the broad global agenda and taking it down to the national level and working together cooperatively across sectors to achieve success on both. I mean, I think that both great points and both critically important to success on the post-2015 agenda. And just before we go to our final panelist, Artemisa, I just wanted to let everybody know that based on where we are with time, I will not take the moderator's prerogative to ask another round of questions, but once we hear from Artemisa, we will then go to questions from the group. So if you're thinking about what you might want to ask, you might go ahead and put that down and get ready to ask a question. So, but finally, Artemisa, from Mexico, you work on crisis issues. And so I'd be very curious to hear about how you think about partnering, with government, with your civil society partners, with private sector, if it happens with your organization, with other organizations, with the youth, how you see that at the national level in Mexico, and how you feel like it can work better or should work better as we go forward into the next set of goals.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for that very interesting question. In fact, this is the basis of our work in terms of working with civil society and building partnerships. And also thank you for being here and attending this panel, this round table. I think, and as I was listening to my fellow presenters, I was thinking that someone already talked about the what and the consultations, and said still was missing the how, but we already heard a lot on the how. And I was thinking about what about the why? Why do we need to build partnerships? And why do we need to start or continue working together in a more efficient and more, I would like to say, passionate manner? And that has to do a lot with the work we do as you mentioned, we worked on crisis. So if I may, I just want to take you about down memory lane. and what happened when we had the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And I remember one of the first things that came onto the table was what is going to happen to the MDGs. And a lot of studies going on about how it was going to be really difficult and how we were going to have a lot of setbacks because of the crisis and the financial crisis, and how probably a lot of countries were not going to be able to reach all the goals, and in fact what happened and what do we know until now. But also what happened with the crisis is we had a growth in the rate of poverty. And we learned something that we already forgotten, that poverty is not just an issue of developing countries. It's also an issue that can come back in developed countries. And that's why I think the first lesson is that's why this new agenda is a universal agenda, and it's not just for a certain amount or certain number of countries. The other one is the issue of unemployment, and how unemployment, even when it can be it could be or sound like an economic issue. It turns into a social issue because it brings a lot of people into this line of vulnerability where they can easily jump on the other side of the poverty line. So I think those two things we learned from or two or three things we learned. But also something else happened in these years, and it was inequality. Strangely enough, now we're not talking so much about poverty, and not just because there's no poor people anymore, but more because we realize that inequality it was still present and has become extremely deep in these years. So there's, as some people might say, there's crisis, but not for everyone. And that's the point of why we have inequality. So what do we take now with this lesson? So what do we take with us? Is in the past, okay, I'm not going to go to the beginning of like the 20th century, but like in the past, since 1973, we had at least like 20 crises. And yes, starting in 2008, we had the food crisis, we had the financial crisis that then turned into a debt crisis that then turned into a fiscal crisis. So crises are something that is going to happen, and we started thinking, why no one ever considered that in the design of the MDGs? And I know that it's going into the what, but it's going to take us to the why. And the why we need to start working together or continue working together and working in a different and better manner. So what can happen if we know that crises are recurrent? So probably in the horizon, it will be another one. Hopefully, fingers crossed not. But what happens with the new agenda if we have some sort of crisis? What happens with inequalities, and how do we address inequalities, and what does that mean for development? We now know, and as Slots, I hope it's the right pronunciation, mentioned, development is a complicated issue, and it covers a broad aspect. So it's a good thing that now we have the three pillars of sustainability in the agenda. But the more complex the agenda, the more people and the more actors need to be involved and need to sign in. So that's the working together thing that you also mentioned in there as well. And so, okay, we know that. We know we need to work together. We know we need to build, or we want to build, a strong agenda. So what is the role we're going to play? So we are now convinced that civil society needs to be a part of it. And I don't know in your countries, but usually in Mexico, when we go to the government, we hear this like, yeah, civil society is really important. And yeah, oh, that's really interesting. That's a very interesting point. Okay, yeah, and we wish we could do that, but okay, let's see how we can work together. Or eventually something happens, I don't know, and unfortunately in Mexico we have a lot of security issues. So then you have all those NGOs working on security that suddenly becomes like the stars of the party. and all other subjects are put aside. So how do we change these dynamics? How we are not subsidiary, like Vera mentioned? How do we become the stars of the party? Okay, so I have good news for you. We are already the stars of the party. And why? Because I'm certain you already heard about something that is called the knowledge economy. And we all hear about the knowledge economy, and we wonder, where is the knowledge economy? It's in the iText, it's in social media. Where is it? As far as we know and as far as we studied in my organization, social sector is the real key actor of the knowledge economy. I'm part in the civil society, I'm part in academia, and I have a lot of friends in academia. I know universities are going through difficult times. They are not benefiting from this knowledge economy. So where are those actors? They are here. Civil society has become the key source of innovation of our time. And if anyone if anyone wants to put into question this, just check the program. See how many workshops, and think about any company or any other sector in the world that can organize an event with those many variety of workshops as we have here. But not just that. What are we doing with social innovation? Okay. First of all, we're all organizations involved in activities that demand formal and tacit knowledge. We offer multiple possibilities for improving people's capabilities. We go into communities, we go into places, and we teach people how to do things differently, but we also learn from them how to do them in a different way than when we got there. So there is a real exchange of knowledge. We also seek innovation for problem solving. So it's not just innovation to see how I can make this pen work better. We are trying to solve problems with the innovation we carry on. We also create interactive learning spaces, where I was talking before. We are also constructing and strengthening social values and prevailing mores. And why is that important? Vera already said. Corruption and trust. Many countries are suffering from trust among their citizens or with their governments, or financial institutions. Can someone blame them? Okay, we rebuild trust, and we also help fight corruption, because people learn they can trust someone, and we also practice transparency and fight for transparency in, for example, open government, stuff like that. We draw connective associations and concepts, and also we are breaking new ground with the work. Every day is like we are not finding new sources of things, but they come to us because of the work we're doing, and that helps us innovate. We also create share expectations. We go into communities, we go into places, even with government officials, and we transform expectations. We tell people things can be different. You can be different, your life can be different. This world can be different. That's a transformation of expectations that also leads to innovation. And finally, we self-organize special interest groups, promote leadership in grassroots, and also build community projects. So I think we sound like a very reliable, nice partner to work. What do you think?
I think we can all agree on that. That's great. That was fantastic. I was sobered by the initial comments on the 20 crises since 1973. Doing the math, that's a crisis every year and a half or so, or 2 years. So we're going to face these crises, and we're going to face them more effectively if we're working together and connecting. And I think by the time you finished, Altamisa, it was very inspiring. You know, you provided solutions on how we can work together. So, you know, thank you for finishing on that note. Before we go to audience questions, I did want to extend apologies from Robert Orr, the Assistant Secretary General for Policy and Planning. He really intended to be here. He is incredibly busy preparing for the climate summit. And he actually is involved with some colleagues right now working on civil society participation in the climate summit. And I think it's safe to say that this climate summit is going to be very different, in large part because of the effort to make it very inclusive of civil society. And I can say that I know that they're talking about that because I was in a meeting this morning with them as they discussed it, and we're thinking about how different sessions can work and be very inclusive of civil society. So he is doing that in advance of departing for Samoa for the Small and Developing States Conference this evening. So again, he extends his apologies and was going to try and make it down even late, but at this point I don't think that he's going to be able to do that. So we thank Bob for his efforts to participate and accept his actual real reasons for not being here. So as we move into the Q&A session, we have a little under 15 minutes. What I'd like to do is ask everyone to please keep your questions short. I know it's very tempting to make statements and then ask a question. I'd like to focus on questions, and we've heard a lot of really sort of compelling responses from the panelists, and focus on kind of what they've said and asking and digging deeper on some of those issues. So please keep the questions tight, and so we can get to as many of you as we possibly can in this short time. What we'll do is take 3 questions, and as you ask your question, please identify yourself, your organization, and who you would like your question addressed to, if there's someone specific on the panel that you would like to hear from. So, okay, we'll take the first round of 3. The first hand up is you, sir.
Yes, Jerry Spivak, CCCUN. I don't know whether we should really be looking at ourselves as partners of the United Nations. Some time ago, I remember an ambassador saying that the wondrous thing about NGOs is that they were able to say the things that other people could not say. And it seems to me that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and since the UN is the organization that's supposed to take care of that, it would be well thought out that we should begin to think of the UN as a business in which each nation is held to certain accounts. We understand what those accounts are, that they're well publicized, and I'm just wondering why we have not yet done that, and why we as the NGOs are not calling for a rapid transformation of the United Nations to meet new needs rather than the old needs of following what the large powers demand.
So I appreciate the comment. Was it a question directed at anybody, or?
No, that's generally for the panel. I would love for them to come up with all sorts of new ways of transforming the UN.
Okay, next, right in the middle here.
I just want to thank you for including civil society. I'm Queen Mother Dr. Blakely. I'm the Community Mayor of Harlem and the Ambassador of Goodwill to Africa, and also representing the New Future Foundation. What do you see as the time frame for the partnership participation in terms of balance and holistic approach to us engaging each other? I thank you.
Well, I am Syed Ijaz Hussain, working as the CEO of a Pakistani organization, NGO, Association of Global Humanists and Ethics. Well, I will just identify a sustainability issue of NGOs in Pakistan, like country in Pakistan, that is related to the international relation and international funding. For example, if international players or international donors have interest in the regions, then there is funding available for the local NGOs and civil societies. And if there is no interest, international interest, then all funding go back to some other region. So all NGOs, for example, in Pakistan, there are more than 70,000 NGOs registered, but out of 70,000, only around 10,000 NGOs are active or working on education, health, and other issues. So sustainability is, particularly of the NGOs work, is directly linked with the international funding, international donors agencies. So it is requested and appealed that international players must have their sustainable agenda. Thank you.
Great. Thanks everyone for your comments. For those three, we'll take those first three questions and comments, and I think that I'd ask any of the panelists to take on any of them. I think it's the first was any big ideas for transformation of the UN. We can take that one on a little bit, possibly, and then the time frame, for the holistic change, and also a question that's always important to civil society is funding and maintaining the viability of the various organizations on the ground and helping with that process. And so, does anybody want to take on any one of those or all of them at the same time?
Time we will do reverse order. On the first question, I think that the NGOs are doing that. I have good news for you, and I give you an example in order to amplify that. Possibly you know about the Future We Want, the World We Want project of the UN Secretariat, where the UN Secretariat, including DPI, ask the people how they want to see our world after 2015. And for us, it was extremely intriguing to see the answers and the priority list of the ordinary people. Because yes, in some cases, it coincided with what the governments have been advocating for. But in many, many cases, it was a completely different list. So if I want to oversimplify it, what you have seen was that the developing countries were more economy-oriented, more industry-oriented, development-oriented, funding, and these kind of issues, resources, technology transfer, and so on and so on. The developed countries were told to be more environment-oriented. And then you saw the ordinary people from the different countries. And despite they were being from different countries, they were very much social-oriented. So indeed, they have talked about the issues of bribery, corruption, the issues of access to justice, the issues of participatory decision-making, the issues related to inequality, and so on and so on. And it was great help to us, co-chairs, when we were devising the document, because we were able to go back to countries and say, okay, guys, we have a problem. I mean, we have the people, as in the UN Charter, saying that there are certain other things that would be important to be in the proposal. And this is why, for example, we have got so much support for Goal 16, which is about peaceful and resilient societies, and accountable institutions, transparent institutions, and so on and so on. So I do believe that you are doing that job. Having said that, I think that we have a lot of other things besides sustainable development that we can move forward. I mean, Security Council reform. I mean, if you have an agency that has procedural rules of procedure for the last 67 years, then you are in trouble. And also the whole General Assembly setup, including the ones that deal with sustainable development and development-related issues. Here, I think we have to understand that we are not in the 1940s anymore. So it's not only, as we have all said, I think, it's not only about governments and member states, it's about stakeholders in general, and we have to come together. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Yes, opening the Security Council reform door. That's always interesting.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Anybody else want to tackle the time frame question or the final question. Please go ahead, Guru.
Thank you. Probably I would not touch the issue of Security Council reform, as Ambassador have said, and also the issue how we can change rapidly on that. But as long as we continue the work, I think it slowly but sure the change that we would like to have, it comes. But of course, if you're talking or asking about time frame, it will be difficult. But we have to continue to work on that. And the question 3 from a colleague from Pakistan, I think I'm not really know how is the mechanism of the global funding in that. But for the countries like, as for example, Indonesia, which is yes, of course, some funding coming from international sources coming into the country, but the thing that would like to be, let's say, to be energized and promote currently probably is how is a government could partnering with the civil societies. For example, let's say how to empower people that they're living rely on to the sea or marine resources, for example, people at the coastal, which is probably the government through their apparatus in the local government could not really coming into that place, but some civil societies having a kind of initiative to do that, they could, let's say, gather a funding from the government. So I think this is also happened in many countries, whereas which is when the government could not really coming into and apply the program within the territory or area that they cannot go, but some civil societies can do that. The partnering between the government and civil societies will be very, very useful, so that the fruit or the overarching development objective could also reach the certain area that could not be reached. Probably that's my little comment for that. Thank you.
Vera or Artemisia, a quick comment on this? Absolutely, Vera, and then Artemisia, you'll have an opportunity.
Very short. I would like to say to Mr. Zolt and others from the UN that the Beyond 2015 campaign is pleased with the openness of the open working group, but a bit concerned about if we are able to continue to maintain this openness in the next steps, and especially how maintain the participation of civil society during the implementation of our framework. And feel a little bit provoked by this idea of reforming the UN. I think that it's perhaps we have to be a little bit patient, but I think it's normal tendency when you foster participation, the crystallize the structure, show that they are not enough. And in Brazil we have this social participation systems with conferences and councils around the country, but our representative system, the legislature, is so dominated by the economic power that nothing that we decide in our councils and conference really come through. So next week we have a big movement in the country. We will promote an official popular referendum about a political reform in the country. And I think that I wish we can, from the roots of our willing to participate, change this old and crystallize the political structures. Thank you.
And Artemisia, I think that you're going to have the final word as we're coming to the close of our time. So please.
Okay, I'll quickly address three really interesting questions. First, new ways of transforming UN. I think Lutz was really clear, and he used a very good word, ownership. If we can manage to own the agenda, and what is the first thing you do when you buy a house is you start changing the house. So ownership is what we really need as people in the world. The second one, I guess, the time frame for engaging it needs to be on our side also to put pressure on our governments. And once we've been here, we can go back and say, these things were discussed, these issues are important, and not just here, but also elsewhere. And there is a general common agreement that we need to start working on this. And I think that's the way we can start pressuring and pushing for the agenda to start moving on. And also recovering the previous commitments. And finally, in terms of international founding or founding in general, part of this idea of innovation and the knowledge economy is we have the product. We already have something that is really valuable, but still we have to do that extra step. And I think that working together, getting to know each other in places like this is going to help us, because donors, they already have an agenda, and they are not always going to match our agenda or the multiple agendas of civil society. So it's the same. We have to own this, and we have to understand how valuable is this capacity of innovation, of organization, of leadership promotion, and how we can turn that into actual money and economic value for us if we truly want to move on in the knowledge economy.
Well, I have to say that I think that's a great commentary to end on. And so I would like to thank Artemisa, Solt, Vera, Eguru for joining me on the panel. So let's give them a big round of applause. Yeah, and finally, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I mean, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to have real inputs into the process as we look to the post-2015 agenda, both the Sustainable Development Goals, the climate agenda. There's a lot happening in 2015, and a lot more will happen in 2016. So all of you being here is really a critical component of that. So thanks to all of you for taking the time and coming to New York to participate.